The revolutionaries swept away by the pace of his own reforms. The Kremlin leader, who started out a master of compromise and ended up its victim. 20 years on, the inside story of Gorbachev's downfall and the demolition of the Soviet Empire.
It was a struggle for life and death. As a politician, I lost, but I could have won if I'd been prepared to use force. But I refused. I stuck to my principles.
By the early 1990s, simmering tensions were erupting into a crisis across the Soviet Union. Reform supporters were pushing Mikhail Gorbachev to go faster, but opponents were also uniting against him. That enormous white building across the Moscow River is exactly what it looks like. The imposing headquarters of someone very high up and very important, Vladimir Putin, the most powerful politician in Russia. But 20 years ago, it was something very different. It was the center of the resistance to the attempted coup that tried to topple Mikhail Gorbachev and reverse his reforms. Resentment of Moscow's control over the Soviet republics was growing. One by one, they were demanding more freedom. In Lithuania, one of the three Baltic republics, the parliament defiantly declared its independence. But Gorbachev, who let Eastern European nations decide their own fate, refused to give them the same right.
The Baltic states were part of the Soviet Union. And anyway, to resolve the issue of seceding from the Soviet Union, we agreed there should be a special mechanism for leaving. But not through trampling on all our laws or rewriting them. No.
He really did not understand the full force of nationalist sentiment. Shevardnadze, being a Georgian, understood this.
The Soviet Foreign Minister Edward Shevardnadze had told the Americans of his worst fears at a private dinner some years earlier.
He said, if we don't change our policies, that could be the end of the Soviet Union. I never thought I would hear the Foreign Minister of the Soviet Union tell the Secretary of State of the United States that his country could be doomed.
Gorbachev's problems were many. He'd given hardliners key positions in his government. His reformist friends had deserted him, as did his foreign minister, warning of an impending dictatorship.
It was the shortest speech I ever made. I said they were preparing to take over power with who knows what consequences. We'll all be in danger, and to register my protest, I am resigning right now.
For ordinary people, economic upheaval was beginning to make life unbearable. Gorbachev took the brunt of people's rage. At times, he sought solace in humour.
Gorbachev told me the following story. He said there was a food shortage in Moscow and people were queuing for bread. And they'd been queuing a long time and they were getting very irritated. And one man turned in the queue and said to his neighbour, "I'm fed up with this. I blame Gorbachev. I'm going to kill Gorbachev." And off he went. He came back 2 days later. The queue had moved forward a little. Well, they said, "Did you kill Gorbachev?" "No," he replied. "The queue to kill Gorbachev was just too long."
And there was another political threat to his power. Gorbachev had created for himself the post of Soviet president to bolster his weakening authority as Politburo chief. But the Russian parliament called elections for its own Russian president. Boris Yeltsin, a former protege of Gorbachev's who'd become his reform rival, won by a landslide. Suddenly, instead of one, there were two contenders to the Kremlin throne. The West tried to court them both. Gorbachev is still resentful.
They even entered into secret agreements with Yeltsin. The British and the Americans know about that, particularly the Americans.
Thank you very much.
We didn't make any deals with Yeltsin. We recognized the fact that Gorbachev was still the president of the Soviet Union. We would meet with him, but we also met with the opposition, and we would meet with Yeltsin as well.
Both he and Yeltsin were reformers. Gorbachev wished to reform communism, Yeltsin wished to destroy communism. But they were both economic reformers. They both wanted a different relationship with the West.
In January 1991, the hardline KGB and defense ministers in Gorbachev's government ordered Soviet troops to attack Vilnius, the capital of the breakaway Lithuanian Republic, testing the waters for a crackdown. It wasn't clear how much Gorbachev knew. Now he admits he was sidelined.
I never gave them permission to impose martial law or presidential rule. They took the decision. People don't realize that the terrible thing was that I didn't know.
The Americans were horrified. The US ambassador went to the Kremlin to protest and asked Gorbachev what was going on.
Gorbachev said, "Jack, tell me, how do you assess the situation here?" And I said, "Mr. President, I no longer understand where you're going." He listened carefully and then he said, "Please, Jack, please, explain to your president, this country is on the brink of civil war. Мы на грани гражданской войны. And I must do, as president, all I can to prevent that. And that means I'm going to have to zig and zag."
The assault on Lithuania failed, rebuffed by popular resistance. They still commemorate the event every year in Vilnius. It was an ominous sign that a power struggle over who should rule the Soviet Union was imminent. By By the summer of 1991, the public mood was becoming angry. At the annual May Day parade, the crowd on Moscow's Red Square jeered at Gorbachev. Meanwhile, members of his government next to him on the podium were privately scheming against him.
We saw in Gorbachev someone who was incapable of governing. We were quite convinced about this.
The Americans heard rumors that a coup was being planned to oust Gorbachev.
It was Yeltsin's idea to warn Gorbachev. I told him, but it's more than a rumor, that a coup is being organized against you and that it could happen at any time. He actually laughed and said something about naive Americans.
By early August 1991, Gorbachev decided to join forces with his arch-rival, Boris Yeltsin. They struck a deal in a secret meeting.
We agreed that Yeltsin would stay in Russia as he was an elected president and Gorbachev would be Union president. And we would get rid of all those who were putting spokes in the wheels. And then we named them, the people we were talking about.
What Gorbachev didn't realize was that the very hardliners he was planning to get rid of had secretly used the KGB to record the conversation. His deal with Yeltsin backfired. His enemies, including his own vice president, defense and KGB chiefs, decided to act at once and stage a coup against him.
Our goal was to convince him that it was essential to declare a state of emergency. Not necessarily in the whole country, but wherever it was required. And besides, we had to find a way to stop the illegal treaty, which was being planned by the leaders of the republics and which was threatening to destroy the Soviet Union.
The coup plotters sent a delegation to confront Gorbachev at his villa by the Black Sea. In a tense meeting, they presented him with their ultimatum.
I even swore at them. I said, go and convene a Congress, and we'll see whose plan gets more support, yours or mine. In the end, they left empty-handed. They flew back. I think they got drunk on the way, and reported back that Gorbachev had refused. Refused what? Refused to sign the order delegating my powers to the vice president due to the poor state of my health. What lies!
Ведут тяжелому ее состоянию. Вранье.